In a couple of minutes, we complete our Wednesday night viewing on BBC1 with Phil Silvers as Sergeant Bilko. That's after the news headlines from John Humphrys.
One man's been shot dead and 3 others wounded in 3 separate shootings in Northern Ireland. A Catholic man was shot 5 times by gunmen in Armagh city centre. And later in Armagh, a man in his 20s was shot and killed as he left work. Tonight in County Down, 2 part-time UDR men have been injured in an ambush near Castle Welland. The European Parliament is to go ahead with its controversial report on the problems of Northern Ireland. In Strasbourg, the Parliament Steering Committee agreed to the report being drawn up, in spite of a last-minute attempt by British Conservative MPs to block it. 21 women from the Greenham Common Peace Camp have been banned from the site and told never to go back or even talk about it. The High Court granted Newbury District Council an injunction against the women and refused them leave to appeal. But the legal battle isn't over yet. An application for a possession order on the peace camp was adjourned until tomorrow. The result of the miners' ballot will be announced at noon tomorrow. They've been counting the votes all day at the offices of the Electoral Reform Society in London. Our industrial editor says it's now clear that the vote has been about 2 to 1 against a strike. Joshua Nkomo, the leader of the opposition in Zimbabwe, has fled the country. Tonight he's in Botswana. It's reported that he drove through the bush in a Land Rover and crossed the border illegally. His passport had already been confiscated. At the weekend, he'd claimed that the government of Prime Minister Mugabe had tried to kill him. The government say he suffers from a twisted mind. President Reagan is planning to resume American arms supplies to Argentina in the face of strong opposition from Britain. Supplies of arms were cut during President Carter's administration because of Argentina's poor record on human rights. Britain's arguing that restoring arms supplies now would encourage Argentina to attack the Falklands again. That's all from us. Good night.
Now, before tonight's escapade with Phil Silvers, a brief look through our lineup for tomorrow night on BBC1. Tomorrow's World is at 7:05, followed by Top of the Pops at 30:30. Then at 8 o'clock, it's something called the Kenny Everett television show. The second part of Glyn Worsnip's series on the Paras is at 8:30, and at 9:25, after the news, there's episode 8 in the serialisation of The Citadel. Ludovic Kennedy is in the chair for Question Time at 10:20, with guests Neil Stewart, Des Wilson, Edwina Curry and John Thorne. Then at 11:15, Claire Rayner's Casebook looks at the problems that society has in coping with the notion of homosexuality. And to complete the evening on BBC1, there's coverage of the men's free programme in the World Figure Skating Championships at 11:40. That's tomorrow, and now here's Phil Silvers as the genial, gentle Sergeant Bilko. This is BBC1. And now for a final check on the weather, we join Jim Bacon.
Good evening to you. Well, certainly the high pressure is still with us, and although it's not quite the same centre of high pressure, it's certainly pretty high and ensuring dry weather for most of the country. There's another small centre forming just to the southwest of us. This one too will edge slowly southeastwards during the next 2 or 3 days, much like its predecessor, now over the Mediterranean. And the other part of the chart which is going to be of interest is to the north at the moment, and that's the front which separates the relatively mild weather coming in on these southwesterly winds following those isobars from the colder northwesterly winds just reaching the far north. And in fact, as that front slips a little bit southwards during tonight and tomorrow, it'll bring colder weather into northernmost Scotland, but in general it'll be dry for most other parts of the country because of the high pressure remaining nearby. And in fact, the forecast chart for noon tomorrow does indeed show the high pressure close to southern parts of the country and the front still close to northern Scotland, but still quite a few isobars there. So that does rather indicate fairly windy weather for the north tomorrow, and of course with the front nearby, fairly cloudy weather as well. For tonight, well, that cloud that's present over many central and western and northern parts of the country is going to mean a fairly mild night for most of us. The clear weather left in some eastern areas will lead to the lowest temperatures there, 3 or 4 centigrade, and perhaps 1 or 2 fog patches as well, but I don't think anything too widespread. In the north and west, of course, with that cloudy weather, you'll get some rain, and particularly in the far north of Scotland, where I think the rain will be rather more persistent. Well, for the rest of the country tomorrow, it looks as though the south, once again, doing best of all in terms of dry weather, and southeastern areas in particular standing the best chances of sunshine. Although some of these central parts of England will start off rather dull and misty, I think in many places there'll be a glimpse or two of sun with temperatures pretty much as they were today, 11 or 12 centigrade. In the far north, however, a rather cloudy day with some rain at times, and some rain extending down these northwestern coasts, although later in the day it will become brighter in the far north, but also colder. Well, that's all from me. Have a very good night to you.
Well, now the time is exactly 12:10, and it's time for us to close down, but we'll be back on the air at 6 o'clock, starting with half an hour of news, weather and travel prospects from our teletext service, CFAX, and then at 6:30 it's breakfast time. By the way, you can catch up on Jane Torval and Christopher Dean's progress in the World Figure Skating Championships at 10 to 7 tomorrow evening. Meanwhile, before any of that, there's the ever-present Radio 2 throughout the night. At the moment, it's round midnight with Brian Matthew, and at 1 o'clock, a second chance to catch this week's Sounds of the 60s, followed by You and the Night and the Music at 2 o'clock. That's Radio 2, but this is BBC One, and we have to go. From me, Malcolm Einan, and from all of us here, thanks for your company, and good night.